evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind plagued with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems, the ones that you can't solve right now and will be easier to solve well rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. This show is brought to you by supporters on Patreon. Times are tough right now for everybody, and so it's very much appreciated when people do what they can to help me to keep the show running despite challenges that they may have in their own lives. Last week I got a new supporter, Ben, who signed up on the Patreon. Thank you very much, Ben, for signing up and helping me to keep the show going. It's important work that I'm doing here, and I couldn't do it without your help or the help of the people that have been around for a long time, some of them. A reminder to all patrons to make sure that you add your custom RSS feed to your podcast app. If you're not sure what to do, I can help you out quite happily. But I have mentioned before, you can't add manual feeds into Spotify and iHeartRadio, I know, and a couple of other very popular apps for people, so I can recommend other ones to you as well. So if you would like to help me keep the show going and possibly even one day help me to do this permanently, really is my dream to be able to do this full time. So if you would like to help and you have the means, please take a look at patreon.com/sleepytimetales. The link is in the show notes, or you'll be able to find it easily from the website, sleepytimetales.net, to see what you can get as a supporter. There are real rewards available from as little as $2 a month, over and above the knowledge that you are helping thousands of fellow insomniacs to get a good night's sleep. Other methods of support are also listed in the show notes. So if a monthly contribution is too much, besides the Patreon, there is the tip jar, there's the merchandise store, which includes masks, and a few other options for you as well. Now, exchange rates mean that even a $1 or $2 can go a very long way, so literally any contribution is appreciated. Speaking of the tip jar, I got a contribution there from Ben, not the same one from the Patreon, a different Ben. What are the odds? Who kicked in a bit of a contribution last week, and it's very much appreciated. Now, another big way to help the show is to just simply spread the word. If there is someone in your life who you think will benefit from listening to Sleepy Time Tales, just let them know. Also, if you recommend the show on social media, make sure to tag me in so that I know and I can thank you. It's at Sleepy Time Tales on Instagram or Twitter. One person I heard from this week told me that they heard about the show from their mental health worker. I gotta say, it absolutely blows my mind to think that my weird little show and my strange little idea is recommended by at least one professional to help people out to effective use. So I'm very curious if there are one or more mental health professionals or workers of sorts who do recommend the show to their listeners. I'd be curious to hear about it and see how well it works for your clients and patients. Obviously, medical privacy is a big thing, so we don't have to get into specifics, but I really am curious to hear from anybody. And I'm also just generally curious to hear from any listeners who have stories to share and want to tell me what goes on in their lives and how Sleepy Time Tales helps them. So drop me an email at contact@sleepytimetales.net and we can chat. Last but not least, because I think tonight's intro is going to go on a little bit long, I will, of course, got to acknowledge the music that I have, which is very important to the show. The song is Un Désert by Kumiko. Their music is available on the Free Music Archive, and I've linked the website in the show notes because they've got some very cool stuff that's released under various names. that I recommend checking out. Thank you for the time. Let's get back to the show. So what exactly is Sleepy Time Tales? What is it for? It's a bit of a strange idea, isn't it? It's a podcast that you're supposed to fall asleep to. But the fact is that in this 21st century of ours, in the year 2020, lack of sleep is a health crisis. And this is a podcast that does what it can to help those that it can to get a restful night. Are you one of those people who find yourself lying awake at night with your mind spinning and your emotions in turmoil with anxieties of life? Do you wake up in the middle of the night and find that you can't just quite doze back off at 3 a.m.? I'm here to help. My name is Dave, and I'm your narrator, here to help you into a restful night. I'm someone who has struggled to sleep ever since I was a baby. My parents had sleepless nights with me for many years, and even once I got old enough not to bother them anymore, sleep really was always a struggle for me. It was later in life that I discovered the tendency for droning voices, particularly male ones, to act something like a tranquilizer for me. I used to listen to podcasts at night because I couldn't sleep, and then I would find myself waking up having slept through the entire thing and having missed everything that I wanted to learn about. And I started listening to podcasts specifically for the purpose of helping me sleep, and then over time I actually discovered that there were podcasts out there actually designed for that and intended for it. I tried out one or two that worked very well for me, but when I recommended them to other people, they often didn't enjoy them. They didn't resonate with them the way that I did. Often they didn't like the narrator's voice or the style of storytelling that they did, or something like that. And eventually, after a while, I thought to myself, maybe I should give it a bash. I've got this boring, drony voice, and maybe I can help some people who others haven't been able to reach. And so I started up Sleepy Time Tales. Now, every episode starts with this long intro. It's something not everybody likes. If I do get a negative review on the show, it's because somebody who doesn't get it doesn't appreciate it. But I know it's something that the people who've stuck around for a while do appreciate for various reasons. And it's important for a couple of purposes. Firstly, if this is your first time with us, I've got to explain to you what the point of a sleep podcast is and how I feel it's best to engage with it. I need to make a bit of a case for it for people who might seem a bit of a strange idea. And to be honest, it is a bit of a strange idea, so I get it. So that's why I take the time to explain it to you. Now, if you've been listening for a little while and it's starting to wear on you and you don't like the intro, you can just hit the timestamp in the show notes and skip straight to the story part. But for a lot of people that have been around listening to the show for a while, even though they know exactly what a sleep podcast is and how to engage with it, it does serve a purpose for them as well. For them, it's part of the process. We're trying to create new habits here. Insomnia, in a lot of ways, is a bad habit, and we're trying to create new habits to replace the old ones. Anyone who's ever tried to quit smoking has probably replaced smoking with another habit or something like that. Not that I've ever smoked, but most of my family did. And they've all quit because they replaced it with other habits. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a new habit for you and a chance for you to prepare yourself and the space that you're in for sleep. We are here to build a space together, a nest that you can settle into. Now, as far as I know, there's a couple of different ways to engage with the show. For me, when I listen to my sleep podcasts, I need something I actually need to listen to. I like a story that I can keep a light mental grip on one so that I don't resist sleep when it comes creeping up on me. Other people, it may be something a little bit more primal. White noise is one of those things that's becoming quite big in this day and age, and for some people, this may be their white noise. Instead of the sound of the ocean or the rain or the wind in the trees, instead, some boring dude droning on in the background is the story for you. Tonight's story is The Sea Gift, a novel by Edwin W. Fuller. Bit of an interesting seeming story thus far. It's written in 1873. As far as it goes, it's basically the story of a precocious young boy in his early life. I'm sure it's going to develop into something later, and I think I'm going to come back to the story at some stage. I'm actually starting planning out picking up later in some of the stories that we've done so far. And but the early part of the story is just this story that's frankly young brat, but it's also still like kind of charming and kind of cute. But while I take the effort to look for stories that are not too stressful for people and are something a little bit entertaining to listen to, but not too entertaining, the story doesn't actually matter. The whole point of it is that you just keep that light mental grip on it that I mentioned, that just follow the story a little bit and let sleep come for you. You can't force it, don't try, just let it happen naturally. Now, obviously, if all goes well, I'm hoping that you're asleep before I get to the end of the episode. If all goes really well, you might even be asleep before we get to the story. And if things go really well, you might even be asleep already. But it's also very important not to feel pressurized. I know some people don't make it to the story quite often, and if it doesn't work for you, that's not a failure. Especially if it's your first time listening to the story. Or listening to the show, rather. It is a bit of a strange idea. As I mentioned, we're trying to create a habit here. So it might take a few nights. If this doesn't work for you tonight, if it's your first night, I recommend come back again tomorrow. I do recommend that it's a good idea. I can't promise that the show will work for you. I know it doesn't, and there are others out there. But I do think it's worth giving a solid 3 nights try to see if it works. If after then it's probably not going to be for you and you can move on, I'll happily recommend the shows I listen to are Boring Books for Bedtime and Sleep With Me, and Nothing Much Happens. Also fantastic shows, all very different sort of formats, different ways of approaching things, and very different authors' voices. So there's something there. I'm sure there's something there that if this doesn't work for you, that will help. So give it the 3 nights, and then if it doesn't work for you, think about moving on. Sometimes even maybe it does work for you, and then you'll get one night when it just doesn't. As I'm recording this now, I had a really bad night's sleep last night. I woke up at like 4 a.m, and my usual habits of going back to sleep just didn't work for me, and that just sometimes happens. What I do with my sleep podcasts is I queue up a few. I keep like a couple of nights worth of each show downloaded, and then I start on the latest episode, and then I just let them run. Usually when I wake up at 4 a.m. or 3 a.m, I pop my earbuds in and I go straight back to sleep. But as I said last night, that didn't work for me, and you know something? That's just okay. That's okay. That's just one of those things. Insomnia is something you got to deal with if you're not going to be drugging yourself or whatever. We're sometimes going to have those nights. And sometimes even I could fall asleep or I sleep through, and sometimes I wake up right before my alarm, 30 or 60 minutes before the alarm goes, and I pop my earbuds in and boop, I'm back to sleep again. One person actually got a message from the other day, actually said like they really appreciate that suggestion of mine in particular. They always used to get up at 4 in the morning after waking up and would end up with a very long day. And they've discovered that little 30, 60 minutes really is incredible. So I really do recommend you try it. There's just something about relaxing right before the alarm that just is deeply, deeply satisfying. But however you engage with the show, if you're struggling to get to sleep, or you've woken up in the middle of the night or just before the alarm, it's very important that you just relax. Listen to the story and relax into it. Because at the end of the day, you can't force it, and you relax and you lie in the dark and I tell you a story, and you just allow it to come and drift away. The one thing I will always promise you, I won't promise you that you will always get a good night's sleep with me, although I'll always do my best, and if it fails, I'm going to be here with you. But the one thing I promise you is that you will be safe with me. I'm here to help you to relax. I'm here to improve your life in a small way, because not sleeping makes life harder. So I'm here to do my small part to help you to face tomorrow and the day after well rested and better able to cope. And if tonight it doesn't work, or another night it doesn't work, don't beat yourself up. Don't rebuke yourself over not sleeping. Don't get tense if you can't get yourself over the edge of sleep, even with me here in your ears trying to help. Frustration is one of the great enemies of a good night's sleep. And the intention with this podcast is to short-circuit that frustration, to distract the feeling that we get when we blame ourselves for not being able to let go and drift into the dark. So take a breath. Forgive the fact that you can't sleep and let my voice wash over you. Take another breath. Imagine the warm darkness rising up, inviting you to sleep and to a better life starting tomorrow. And if you can't let go, forgive yourself. Forgive yourself and we'll try again tomorrow. If you're one of those people who's had a life of insomnia, sleep can feel like an enemy, but sleep is not your enemy. It's a natural part of life. It's a process that life pulls us away from, and I'm here to work with you, to help you to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So if you're still with me, thank you for staying. If you're already asleep, we'll chat again soon. And of course, you aren't hearing me, except maybe in a dream. Sea Gift, a novel by Edwin W. Fuller. E.J. Hale & Son Publishers, Murray Street, New York, 1873. Preface. Reader, my book is before you. If it has faults, you expect them, therefore excuse. If it has merit, you are surprised, therefore applaud. E.W.F. I affectionately dedicate this love story to one who has taught me the beauty and depth of woman's love, my wife. Sea Gift, Chapter 1. As the usages of society generally require an introduction between strangers before communications of any moment can transpire, I hasten now to introduce myself, that the readers hereof, as yet strangers, but whom I hope before long familiarly to call gentle and dear, may acquire at least one element of interest in the narrative I propose to offer, namely acquaintance with its subject. Modesty forbids me to say hero. I am then at your service, John. No, I cannot call my own name. It always sounds strange in my own mouth. I'll hand you my card in a moment. And while I am fingering nervously in my case for the best engraved one, I reflect, Why should you listen with the slightest attention to my history? How can I expect you to care any more for me and my affairs than for anyone else, and anybody else's affairs? What right have I to inflict upon you a recital of events, in no way connected with yourself, that 3/4 of you believe untrue, and that concerns parties you never saw and perhaps never will see? None, reader, none. All the attention you give must be entirely gratuitous, except what I shall gain by tickling the selfish side of your nature. For I well know that you like or dislike a book in proportion as yourselves are flattered. This flattery, however, must not be the result of the author's effort, but your own. If the persons told are beneath you in morals or intellect, then it is pleasant to reflect on your own superiority. Are they above you in these particulars? Then you are pleased to associate with them, so to speak, and to assign to yourselves, in imagination, a similarity of conduct under similar circumstances. The book must also possess an ingenuity of thought and expression that will make you conscious, to a flattering extent, of your own ingenuity in detecting it. Hence, often the most pleasant books to read are those that tell of simple things in such a way that you exclaim, "I could have written that myself if only I had thought of it." To afford self-complacent comparisons to the conceited, to furnish evidences of their own ingenuity to the soy distant original, and to give conscious improvement to the soberly studious, is a more difficult task than I can undertake. I will simply tell my story and leave the self-bees to suck whatever honey they please out of it. Ah, I have at last found it. Here is my card. John Smith. You smile? You know me? No, I beg pardon. I have never had the honor of your acquaintance. You may have known some of the Smiths, but not the members of our immediate family. John is an old family name with us. My father, grand and great-father were all named John. In fact, we could ascend the family tree 6 squares without getting out of the Johns, and even the 7th, who was an H.T. Smith, was preceded by numerous Johns, only to be distinguished from each other by the middle initials. There was a John A. Smith, and a John B. Smith, and a John C. Smith, coming down so alphabetically that I used to think when a child that as father and myself only had John for our names, a great many Smiths whose names were lost had already lived and used up the balance of the alphabet for their middle initials. Our family is a very large one, being represented in almost every nation of the globe, but its vast extent is a matter of pride and not reproach with me. When I remember the long list of warriors, statesmen, scholars, and the immense army of Usmen it has given to the world, I conceive that the world owes the name a debt of gratitude, and being one of the creditors, I expect partial payment at least. The name itself points to an artisan origin, but the sieve of centuries has filtered our blood clear of the last dust of the anvil, and it throbs in our veins with Heraclidian purity. Perhaps the majority of my connections were men of humble birth, but where the number is so immense, we can claim only those that are creditable. Consequently, the aforesaid tree, hanging up in our library with dusty, tarnished frame and an age-yellowed parchment, presented a very mottled appearance of groups of very little blocks, with very little Smiths written on them in very large blocks, their names spelt in capitals and with broad red lines connecting them to us. These last were Smiths who attained to something and were worth claiming. Away off in one corner, and with a great quantity of zigzag lines to make it even connect at all, was the name of John Smith, with Captain prefixed, and the date 1609. Father used to take me on his knee when I grew old enough to listen and tell me long stories about my brave relative, who had fought with the Turks, slept on straw, a fact which led me to believe that he was also a kinsman of Margaret Daw, dared the Indians, looked calmly at Powhatan's lifted club, and then flirted with his gentle protectress, Pocahontas. Her descendants in Virginia, father told me, always claimed kin with our family, though the relationship was based entirely on this approximation to matrimony between our ancestors. I remember well that I did not wish to recognize as relatives the children of Pocahontas, and I insisted that they be put down with little blocks and little smiths, until he informed me that many of them had become distinguished. And while it was quite a disgrace in society to have had a dark ancestor with kinky hair, it was quite an honor to have had a dark ancestor with straight hair. I have seen in life since then that social distinction often turns upon less than the crook of a hair. For our immediate family, there were father and mother and I, after I came. My father was wealthy, owning a very large plantation near Goldsboro, a fine residence in Wilmington, North Carolina, and some heavy renting real estate in New York. Possessing the means for it, he was fond of display and stood among the neighbors in the country as a proud, though popular man. They admired his pride because it was above their envy, while his uniform courtesy and kindness flattered all with whom he had intercourse. His carriage at elections was sure to be welcomed with cheers, as it drove on the grounds, though he could never be persuaded to dabble in the turbulent waters of politics. In town, some loved, some envied, but all respected him. His perfect integrity, his generosity, and his social qualities secured for him, at all times, a large circle of friends, while there were some who, feeling socially equal, were surpassed by him in character, both in their own eyes and in public opinion. These, of course, regarded him with some disfavor. But of mother no tongue spoke evil. Everyone possesses a distinguishing idiosyncrasy. Hers was goodness, all that was comprehended under St. Paul's charity. There was no sounding brass or tinkling cymbal about her life. It was one of unselfish love, active benevolence, holy influence, and unassuming piety. I believe that the only command in the Bible she could not obey was, "Take up thy cross," for her angelic temperament made every duty a pleasure and every sacrifice a source of happiness. Nor was she only theoretically good. She put her faith into constant practice. When her pew was vacant at church, the doctor was sure to be our visitor. The pupils in her Sabbath school class made an entire transfer of the affections they should have reserved for their own mothers to her, and our servants refrained from any insolence and disobedience out of the purest respect for her. A perfect anomaly in slavery. The meanest hut in town could boast her presence if there was sickness within its walls, and our dining room servants brought a salver and napkin for charity delicacies as regularly as they laid the cloth. Yet charity was not of that order which begins anywhere else but at home. Everyone in our house felt that she had a deep interest in them. Her smile was almost constant, and when she did reprove, there was a tone of regret about her words, as if they pained her more than they did the recipient. She and father were very happy together, though they lacked congeniality. He was fond of display and gaiety, she fond of retirement and quiet. His heart chiefly on the world, hers all on heaven. He haughty though courteous, she gentle and kind. He formal, she good-natured and easy in her every manner. Father was a Polonius about dress, believing it should be costly as thy purse can buy. And he inundated mother's wardrobe with silks, brocade, and velvets, and constantly replenished her bijouterie with jewels of rare value, till she was as much bewildered as Miss McFlimsy from a cause just the reverse. I have often smiled to see her, just to please father, start to church in a magnificent train and exquisite bonnet, looking for all the world like a poor dove dressed in peacock's plumage. But I must not plunge into affairs too rapidly. Having given this short prologue before the curtain, I will now let it rise upon the first scene. Ring the bell. Chapter 2. I was apparently expected, for as I have been credibly informed, an extensive wardrobe had been prepared for me, and a whole drawer in the bureau appropriated for its storage. The said wardrobe consisted of several long sacerdotal robes of the finest cambric, a dozen or more very unsacerdotal-looking nether garments of linen and cambric, ruffled and trimmed with thread lace, a number of gowns of rich material, also a couple of flannel skirts, heavily embroidered and seemingly intended only to dangle the feet, and quite a pile of unmentionables with necessary fastenings. There was also an elegant India muslin robe, trimmed with embroidery and fretted with lace, and a handsome lace cap, laid apart to themselves. These, as I afterwards learned, were intended for my baptismal suit. I have thus particularized because I'm rather proud of having come into property so early. One blustering night in the latter part of March I arrived, invaded the wardrobe, and appeared next morning on a pillow of state, ready to receive company. My appearance could not have been excessively prepossessing, as I formed no exception to the usual standard of aesthetic attainment exhibited by little red monsters of my age. My hair was very thin and peach fuzzy, my eyes of uncertain hue, and apparently disgusted with the world and its sights, if we may judge from the persistency with which they kept the puffy, lashless eyes closed. A dusty little forehead that wrinkled so much when the eyes did open that one would suppose I had seen trouble and had losses in the world from which I had so recently come. My mouth, purple and projecting with the upper lip, while the underlip was sucked in after the most approved directions for pronouncing the Greek phi. The sleeves of my wrapper were rather too long, the usual fault of our first clothes, arising perhaps from the fact that while they are in the process of construction, there is no opportunity for trying them on us, and were rolled up around my tight-closed fists, which kept digging into my eyes with prize-fighting pertinacity. The day following my advent being Sunday and the place of my birth being in the country, many of the neighbors dropped in to see Mrs. Smith and the baby. All went through the same program. "How do you do, Mrs. Smith? I hope you came through well. But then this is your first. There's nothing like getting used to it. And where's the little dear?" And without waiting for my mother's replies and thanks, they would turn to the nurse holding me in her lap on the pillow, and removing from the wrapping from my face as carefully as if it were a bird and would fly out, they would gaze at me mesmerically, cluck to me with a perseverance undamped by the want of effect, and finally turn away with a defiant assertion that I was the perfect image of both my parents. An assertion which would have been at least debatable from the fact that my father was very dark in complexion and feature, and my mother very fair. Some even insisted on holding me, the spinster visitors being particularly desirous of this privilege, and gathering me in their laps, they would examine the tightness of my clothing and the temperature of my skin, with the well-assumed criticism of experience. And if one found on thrusting her hands beneath my clothes that my feet were cold, most proudly and complacently would she unfold my garments and expose my little splotched limbs to the fire. My feet and legs must have looked very pitiful indeed, sticking out of a wilderness of flannel like two slim beets, crossing each other with their little flat soles, as if I was born to be a tailor. When the visitors were gone, my father would come and gaze long and steadily into my face, then anxiously suggest that something must be the matter with me, because I was lying so still. And my mother would call for me to be brought to her, and after innumerable fixings, adjusting the cloth over my face this way, turning my head that way, hiding the point of one pin, pulling out another, straightening this and that fold of a garment, after all these nervousnesses peculiar to young mothers, I would be found to be sleeping soundly, and then mother would regale herself with a long conversation between us, although it is more than probable she monopolized the talking. But as my presence, so important to one household, had no effect whatever upon the old monarch of the glass and scythe, the days still managed to glide by. And with the crying spell at the morning bath, the troublesome feeding, father's fidgets, and mother's anxiety, I arrived at the first era in baby life. Noticing. What an important period. How many things were tried to attract my attention. Father whistled and clucked his mouth almost away. Aunt Hannah, my nurse, coming with my bottle, would tinkle on it with her thumb and sputter her lips to draw my blinking eyes towards her. And mother shook, successively and constantly, all her different bunches of keys over my face, in the vain endeavor to discover my favorite. Unconscious I, all the while lying on my back, vacantly staring to see the sounds. Mother now being able to sit up, it was a constant delight to have me in her lap, treating me as if I were a doll, and she, a girl of 10, trying vainly to part and brush my scanty hair, making me sit up while she kept my limber neck steady with one careful hand, and wearing my palms out, teaching me to patty cake. And such air castles as she would build for me, telling me with as much emphasis as if I understood it all, and with each word giving me a soft peck on the cheek with her forefinger. Never mind, Tweakness. We'll do away from this old country house soon and live in the town. And then the putty things Johnny will have. A putty little carriage and a great big yuckin horse with a long mane and tail and a little green wagon and a little black dog and so many, many putties for a tweet little boy. Then chattering my chin in her ecstasy of love till the titillation made me draw my face into a shape that might, by a very wide stretch of the imagination, be called a smile. She would scream for father to witness my display of intelligence. He, of course, would not believe it till I was chattering again, but instead of the laugh, the concussion of my gums would produce such plaintive wails that mother would apologize, with all the pleonasm of baby talk, and soothingly request me to, "There then, darling." My extreme youth prevented me from seeing the exact philosophy of there-theying under pain, and I would continue my vocale till something more palatable to baby taste than baby talk would stop my mouth and sleep's gentle wing would fan away my tears. How long would a mother's patience watch my slumbers while she mused on the strange responsibility of her position? A soul given to her to form for good or evil. The potter's clay placed in her hands to make a vessel unto honor or dishonor. How fervent her prayer, "O Father, guide me to guide him." What an impostor is the slumbering babe! His tiny hand, resting in dimple fairness on your breast, seems to lift the veil of futurity and open to your view the brightest paths of flowery beauty, down which his own feet shall patter with the innocence of childhood, run with the eager ambition of youth, stride with the honors of manhood, and totter with the feebleness of old age into the grave over which towered the marble tribute of a nation's love. Were the real curtains lifted and life's true pathway shown, how earth's timid ones would shrink from its thorns and poisons, its bubble hopes and bitter cups. Thank God the future is hidden, but the promise stands. As thy days are, so shall thy strength be. Chapter 3. The year, growing old, began to feel ashamed of the jaunty green in which the spring and summer had decked him, and was laying aside his verdant garments, leaf by leaf, for the more dignified russet of autumn, when we, that is to say, father, mother, and myself, prepared to return to our winter residence in Wilmington. I, of course, have no recollection of the journey, but have since been told that I stood it like a little soldier, though whether diminutive stature had as anything to do with military fortitude, I leave to nursery disputants to settle, as I believe their invariable encouragement to patience and endurance is the example of a fictitious officer of small size. The man has never been a child who has not been requested to take a dose of physic, or bear a mustard plaster like a little captain, thereby inspiring himself with the greatest respect and admiration of the immense deglutitory capacity of that functionary and the callosity of his epidermis. The winter in turn passed away, and another spring and summer in the country, and we were returning again to town in the fall. Therefore I can begin to recollect things on my own account. What vague, undefined, and grotesque memories there are. The carriage in which we travelled seems now to have been a chaos of shawls and baskets, from which father, mother, and Aunt Hannah protruded helplessly, like pictures of fairies coming out of flowers. It was very cloudy, or at least everything now seems to have been grey when we started. The wheels commenced humming a drowsy tune, and they rolled through the sand, and soon hummed me to sleep. And when I awoke, the carriage was going backwards, and the sun had come out in the wrong place. Then we stopped at a well near a house with a fat wooden chimney, and an aspen tree in front whose leaves seemed to be blinking all their hours at me. A man in a broad-flapped hat came out with a gourd in his hand, and behind him a large yellow dog, and was tied to a piece of wood and barked and jumped on each side of the string as if he wanted to shake it off. The well had a long pole with a bucket at one end and a large stone at the other, and when Horace, our driver, went to it to draw some water for the horses, the stone seemed to fly up to the clouds. Then Horace filled the bucket and carried it to the horses, and I could hear them kissing it, as if they were so glad to see it. And while I was listening at that, the man with the hat and the dog got handed in, at the carriage window, the great cool-looking gourd, with a long crooked handle, down into which the water clicked as if laughing, when Father held it to me to drink. After I had been bidden to thank the kind gentleman Johnny, and done so, Horace strapped the bucket again under the carriage, got up to his seat, and the house and well moved back out of sight, just as the man sent the stone flying up again to the sky. All is blank for a long time, till Horace drives over a snake, and they hold me up to the window to see it. My eyes can discover nothing but the shadow of the bucket swinging between the wheels, and ever afterwards a bucket under one of the old-fashioned carriages is associated with a dead snake and a hot sandy road. There is another sleepy blank, and I drowsily rouse up as we drive into town to find it dark, and the lights all in a hurry to go some way, chasing each other by the carriage window till one bold blaze stops right in front of it, and Father exclaims, "Here we are." We get out, shawls and chaos and all, and I'm carried up some broad stone steps into a large hall with bright lights, and on through to a strange room with our new faces among the servants, a little excrescence of the fireplace filled with red coals and a large table steaming with good-smelling dishes. Everything for an indefinite period after this is confused and unsatisfactory, and I can eliminate nothing into distinct recollection but two series of events, which from their frequent repetition have become facts of memory, viz., riding in my little carriage, and, in educational phase, corrections, more plainly, whippings. What tortures I suffered in my carriage, children alone know. Enclosed on three sides by the leather curtains, I was confined in front by a strap, which was buckled across my breast to keep me from falling out, and thus cooped up like a criminal. I would sit, listening to the grinding, gritty sound of the wheels as they rolled over flagstones, bumping my head against the framework, knocking my cap awry, and not knowing how to put it straight again, and suffering the misery of whining without being noticed, a source of much affliction, by the way, to many grown-up children. My nurse, all the while walking behind and pushing me along, engaged in too deep a conversation with other nurses to heed my murmuring. One of my sorest trials was to pass the stores, and have some pert clerk stop my carriage and say, "Hello, auntie, whose child is that?" "Colonel Smith's, sir." "Why?" Coming to me and squatting down by the carriage, "I'll declare he's a fine little fellow. How do you do, sir?" "Tell the gentleman how dear," persuades Aunt Hannah, who, like all nurses, is flattered by compliments to her protégé. But before I can turn away in disgust, his tobacco-smelling moustache scratches my face. My greatest consolation in all this persecution was to meet little Lily Mayland, my assigned sweetheart, though I was rather young for the blind god's arrow. Our nurses would lift us from our carriages and hold us up to kiss each other, and I would be in perfect glee as she tried to put her little plump fingers into my eyes, and I felt her moist little mouth on my cheek. Putting me down in the foot of her carriage, we would be rolled home together, as happy and joyous as children only can be. The other series of events, to which I have alluded, were, from their very frequency, fixed still more indelibly upon my mind, though the intense activity of certain cognitive faculties during their occurrence may have contributed somewhat to their retention. There were the immediate and inevitable consequences of any recusancy on my part in regard to the rules of the bath. I possessed the usual hydrophobic prejudice of extreme youth, and dreaded morning ablutions as Rome did the Gauls, Had I been old enough to have managed the bath myself, I should not have cared. But to be washed like a dish, put into the tub, and spongeful after spongeful squeezed over me was more than my good nature could submit to. Mother, finding her reasoning wasted and her commands disregarded, would send for switches, and laying me across her lap, pour hot embers, as it seemed to me, on my naked legs. I did not stop to debate, which I might have done with propriety, whether the friction developed the latent heat of the rods or whether they were actually set on fire and then applied. I simply recognized the fact that unless the bath came, the fire did, and I wisely chose the former. The ember's influence would last on average about 2 days, when they would have to be again applied. Chapter 4. I had been disturbing the center of gravity of our globe for 9 years, and had grown up into a mischievous, fun-making urchin, always out of the way when wanted and in the way when not. I would have passed any committee on boys and probably taken the medal as the best specimen. I had fulfilled all the requisites of custom. I had torn out all my pockets with loads of marbles, knives, strings, stones, buttons, nails, etc. I had cut my hands and fingers and fallen out at doors, perhaps even more than was necessary. I could soil a ruffle with all the facility of contempt for such a feminine ornament. I could wear out shoes and tear a hat as quickly as the most reckless, and I had a real first-class aversion to trying on clothes in process of making. The rough edges of an unfinished jacket rubbed into my neck by the fingers of the seamstress, not at all according with that placidity of temperament I had been advised to cultivate by the dogs and bears' poetry, while the rapidity with which I could cover clean clothes with mud was, I fear, a matter of peculiar pride, as it was of certain punishment. My most perfect attribute of boyhood, however, was the devotion I bore my sweetheart, and the utter apathy and indifference with which I regarded all other girls. Being such an one, I was highly gratified when Mother said to me one day, "Johnny, we are going to have a dinner party next week, and as you will be without company, you may go over and invite Lulie Mayland." "Oh, I'm so glad, I sung out, "and I mean to go over right now and tell her to come." "No, no," said Mother, smiling and taking me by the jacket button. "We have not sent out our cards yet. Wait till Monday, then you can go." I was disposed to whine at the delay, but she pinched my cheek as she got up from her chair and said, "No, you must do as I say, sir," and left me full of impatience for the advent of Monday. During the remainder of the week, I exercised fully the child's faculty of being ubiquitous at home. The kitchen, however, received the largest share of my attention. I was around every table, dipping in every dish, and in the cook's way to my fullest extent. If she turned around with a pan in her hand, it was sure to thump my head, and my anger thereat could only be appeased by letting me have a piece of dough to feel or a bowl to scrape. If eggs were to be beaten, I must try to froth them until I was as full of foam as a half-born Aphrodite. If flour was to be sifted, I was sure to get whitened. If spices were to be pounded, I was certain to have my fingers mashed, and the burns I received in trying to cook little dabs of cake would have discouraged Lucius Savola. Then my insatiate curiosity and constant inquiries in regard to the numerous articles scattered around would have worried out a less irascible nature than that of our cook, and by a final appeal to Mother and a command from headquarters, I would be forced to raise the siege and retire from the field, with a jacket full of sugar and flour, sullenly licking my fingers in defiance. Verily, children prove the old adage true. Satan finds some mischief still for idle hands to do. And yet, how dear to us are their mischievous ways, and how blank and drear would childhood be without them. The sunshine of their presence is always brightest when flaked by little clouds of annoyance, and when your tenderest bud has been plucked by the reaper, your heart-strings throb saddest o'er the toy that's broken, and your tears fall in torrents o'er the little torn garment, while the clothes neatly folded pass unnoticed by. Early Monday morning, I hurried over to tell Luli. As I entered her gate, I discovered her at play near a large rose bush, but was surprised and troubled to see a strange boy with her. I had somehow, in my own mind at least, assumed a kind of proprietorship over her, and the presence of anyone else in whom she could take any interest whatsoever was excessively annoying. I managed to creep up quite near without being discovered, and stood for some time watching them and feeling in my jealousy an almost irresistible desire to try stone the strange head. They were busy arranging a dollhouse, which consisted of rows of dirt piled up like fortifications with lumps of moss for chairs and sofas, and an array of dolls that seemed to have been taken from the hospital, so much were they maimed in their legs and arms. The strange boy and Luli seemed very intimate, and bent their heads together and talked in delighted and animated accents, he suggesting and she listening and adopting his suggestions. And there he had on such new clothes, such a jaunty cap, such a bright blue jacket with bright buttons, and such boots with heels. In him I recognized a formidable rival, and concluded to retreat and give up all thoughts of the invitation. As I endeavored to slip away unobserved, I overturned a little tea set that was placed to one side, awaiting the completion of the house. At the noise, they both turned around and saw me, and Luli's face flushed a little as she exclaimed, "There now, see what you've done. Turned over all my teacups and broken I don't know how many." I offered with all earnestness the child's universal apology. I didn't go to do it, but felt that it was not accepted, and that I, Luli's acknowledged sweetheart, was not welcome. But boys are not oversensitive, and I knew that to retire then would only make matters worse. I swallowed my confusion and joined in their play. Luli did not introduce me to her companion, but I soon learned that his name was Frank, and that he was fast supplanting me in her favor. All my suggestions in regard to the disposition and arrangement of the furniture were at once overruled and disregarded for what he thought best. All her questions and remarks were addressed to him, and they both seemed oblivious of my presence, save when they wished me to perform some office for them. Then Frank, as she called him, had such an insolent way of staring at me, and walking around with his hands stuck contemptuously in his trouser pockets. And when we had completed the house and were cleaning up, he raked away the earth with his boots, and made little ditches around the walls with his heels and stamped the walls level. In short, made such a display of his Morocco that I felt quite ashamed of my plain copper-tip shoes, and tried to hide them as much as possible by standing in the grass. After a while it was proposed to get the dolls' dinner ready, and then I thought of my errand. Without a moment's consideration for Frank's feelings, I broke out with, "Oh, Luli, I forgot. You must come to our house tomorrow. We're going to have a dinner and have got lots of good things cooked. There won't be any other girls there but you, and your pa and ma are coming too. Won't you come?" "I don't know," she replied, tying an apron to a very red-faced doll with china feet, wooden legs, and her hair rubbed off the back of her head. "I don't want to go much, because me and Frank are going to have a doll wedding tomorrow. Frank, let me tell you," breaking off suddenly and putting the doll down with her face on the ground and her wooden limbs very much exposed, she took Frank aside to whisper something to him. I inferred it was a proposal to invite me to their dinner, as he replied loud enough for me to hear, "No, let's have it all by ourselves." Luli seemed to assent, and I'd become rather incensed at the whole proceedings. I turned off without another word and went home. Children suffer as keenly, if not as long, in their little loves and jealousies as older people, and I was unhappy during the remainder of the day, as was Octavia while Antony was in Egypt. Many were the castles I had built in the air, all of which Luli reigned as queen. My favorite dream was to imagine her and myself wrecked and playing Robinson Crusoe on some desert island. I had loved to think how we would sit together by the beach and watch the frightened billows fleeing to the shore, or stroll through shadowy forests in search of fruits. and how I would defend her from the wolves and bears, and how tender and confiding she would be when she had no one but me to look to. And then at night, how cozy and snug we would be in our cave, and would always be warmed and lighted by some means. And when the savages came, how we would shut the great stone door and be safe and secure. But I had now found in the sand not the naked footprint Robinson saw, but a boot track, which conjured up more fears and suspicions than Defoe ever conceived, for it told the presence of a cannibal for my heart. The next day wore away, and the guests began to arrive. Having nothing better to do, I stationed myself at the hall window to watch the carriages as they came up to our door, and their contents came out. The first that arrived were the Shaleys, numbering Mr. Edward Shaley and wife, a stylish old couple who prided themselves on their family and position in society, and the two Miss Shaleys, ladies who had been in the market for some time and as yet were unspoken. They were great sticklers for the usages of society, and dependent in a great measure on the social prestige and en règle manners for the attention they received. They were well aware of the fact, and while Mr. Shaley had given balls and parties innumerable for their benefit, he had not yet given a wedding party. And to accomplish for him the privilege of giving one was, and had been, their constant aim, albeit its fervour was a little abated by its continued futility. As they entered the hall and found the hat and coat stands empty, Miss Ella, the younger, turned to her father, and with much petulance exclaimed, "Now, Pa, I hope you are satisfied. You would hurry us off, and now we are the first. I declare it is really too bad." "Yes, it is," chimes in Miss Gertrude, the elder, "and it looks as if we were dreadfully anxious to come." "Well, my daughters," philosophizes Mr. Shaley, "somebody has to be the first, and we are fully 10 minutes behind the time specified." 10 minutes, exclaimed both young ladies, between the pronunciation of the 10 and the minutes changing their faces from a frown to a smile, as Mother, hearing their voices, appeared in the hall and welcomed them, taking the ladies off to the cloakroom, while William, our servant, who had been leaning against the stair while their conversation was proceeding, recovered himself sufficiently to usher Mr. Shaley into the parlour. Many others arrive and are passed in, until at length 2 young gentlemen approach, toss away their cigars, and stroll, as it were, up the steps, taking a long time to reach the door and conversing in a low tone which I could overhear. "I wonder who's to be here today," said the first, frowning as if in pain as he buttoned his glove with an effort. "Dinners with the old folks are devilish bores." "I understand the 2 Mrs. Shaley will be here, and that will be some relief," replied the other, pulling down his wristband so as to show the white. "Yes, quite a relief to you. From your devotion down at Bentrick's last evening, I should judge you were really in love with that long, languishing Gertrude." "Hush, Castle. I vow you shan't speak disrespectfully of her. I have a right to admire her, if she is a little oldish." "Success to you, Burton. Here goes for an hour's boredom with that little mincing, over-vivacious Ella." And he pulled the bell, muttering as he did so, "I say confound these small and select gatherings. A fellow is always put off with a fussy old maid or a gassy old fogey who will talk you into an anatomy in 5 minutes. "Anyway," whispered the other, as William opened the door, "Old Smith keeps good wine and feeds well." They are followed in turn by others, till at last Dr. Malin's carriage drives up, and to my great surprise and delight I recognize the curly little head of Luli through the window. I was too much piqued by her conduct of the day before to run out and meet her, but sprang at her from behind the door as she entered in a conciliatory kind of way, and we both lost our stiffness with a hearty laugh. Without waiting for more arrivals, I hurried her off to the nursery. "I thought you were not coming," I began, as soon as we were fairly in, "but that you and that Frank somebody were to have a doll's party." "Yes, but you see, Frank and I fell out," she replied quickly, "and I think he is ever so mean." "So do I responded warmly. Don't let's have anything more to do with him. We can always have more fun by ourselves, can't we? Yes, we can. You're not mad because I said what I did yesterday, are you? No, that I'm not, I replied, delighted at the turn things had taken. But come, Luli, let me show you what my father gave me on my birthday. Sitting down together on the rug before the bright glowing fire, we took out of its box a little model of a house in separate pieces and commenced to put it together. I sat and gazed at her as she bent over the blocks trying to make piece after piece fit, and she looked so beautiful with one side of her face all red from the fire, and her clustering brown curls drooping so gracefully around it, that I could resist the inclination no longer, but leaned forward and kissed the glowing cheek. Oh, stop, she said, tossing her hair without looking up. You bother me so I can't build the house at all. This was so much milder than I expected. I tried another. Stop, I tell you, she exclaimed, feigning to strike me with one of the blocks. See, you've tumbled all the house off. I will stop, I said, looking at her very earnestly, if you'll give me a kiss of your own accord. Here then, she said, raising her head and throwing back her curls. She put up her rosy lips and I kissed her. People say children know nothing about love, but there was a thrill of pleasure and a smack of romance in that kiss before the nursery fire, that none which have ever since touched my lips have possessed. We amused ourselves in various ways till the servant brought in our dinner, spread the nursery table, and, as I gave Luli my high chair, piled up books and another for me, to bring me up to a comfortable level with our meal, and then left us to enjoy it. We chewed out praises and smacked out lavish encomiums on the skill of the cook, as we eagerly applied ourselves to her dainties. And when Luli had sipped the last trembling particle of blancmange and added the debris of the last grape to the goodly pile in her fruit plate, we got down, instead of rising from our chairs, and went from the nursery to the dining room. The ladies had withdrawn some time since, and the gentlemen had almost finished their wine. The two young men who had characterized dinners with the old folks as devilish bores had excused themselves and gone back to the parlors. Finding nothing to interest us in the dry, stale jokes or the political fanfaronade of the dining room party, we ran off to the parlors and took our station on each side of the door to watch all within. The ladies were grouped around the fires or examining the pictures, while Mr. Castle and Miss Ella, Mr. Burton and Miss Gertrude were promenading slowly the whole length of the rooms. We thought this was a great sign of love and watched them with great interest. As they approached our end of the room, we could hear very well, but when their backs were turned, their words were gradually lost, so that ideas of the tenor of their conversation were somewhat disconnected. Mr. Burton, who seemed interested in what he was saying, and Miss Gertrude, equally so, approached first. Yes, indeed, he was saying, as they came into earshot. We had a most charming time. The moonlight was as bright as day, and Minnie scarcely rippled the water. The music, too, was better than usual, and we danced 8 sets going down, besides the round dances. We missed you a great deal. Everyone was inquiring for Miss Gertrude. Ella told me what a delightful excursion it was, replied Miss G, trying to pout bewitchingly, as if still vexed at her own absence. I was so exceedingly unwell that Ma would not hear to my going, and I had a real hard cry over it. When do we have another? I'm afraid not before the next moon. We are talking, however, of setting up a picnic for the Sound next. They passed down the room and out of hearing, as Castle and Miss Ella came up, she all smiles, he all languor. You say they are from the western part of the state, he inquired, with a drawl, as if he only pursued the subject because he was too lazy to find another. Yes, replied Miss Ella, with nervous vivacity. From Charlotte, I think. They are quite an addition to our society, are they not? Quite, laconicized Castle, as if he had gone all for the subject that could be required of him. And then, she continued, they're connected with the Cartoneaus of South Carolina, who you know are some of the first people in the state. Mr. Payning brought a letter of introduction to Pa from Judge Francois Cartoneau. He and Ma called, of course, and they were much pleased, though Mrs. Payning, Ma thought, was a little stiff. Lily and I were immensely interested in this conversation and eagerly listened for its further development. Mr. Castle paused a while, as if to debate whether his system could stand a continuance of the conversation. Then, with a resigned arch of his eyebrows to himself, he asked, "Do they intend to reside here?" "Ah, yes. They have bought Mr. Huxley's place and are having it fitted up in magnificent style. When they move in, I understand they intend giving a great ball." Mr. Castle paused again, then taking a flower from his lapel, bit it savagely and asked, "Have they any daughters?" as if it was the last question she might expect from him. "No, they have only one child, a little boy named Frank after his uncle, Judge Cartoneau." Castle did not appear at all interested in the name of the little boy, but I was intensely so, and leaned in the door to hear more. But unfortunately that passed down the room out of hearing, while Miss Gertrude and her beau came again into audience. They were still on the subject of the excursion, and Mr. Burton was verging towards the sentimental, while Miss Gertrude was encouraging him with all the art she could command. "I'll vow I didn't, Miss Gertie. I sat apart the whole night thinking of you." "Why, Mr. Burton, Ella told me you were perfectly devoted to Miss Withers." "Withers, indeed. She's perfectly horrid. But did you think enough of me to inquire what I did?" "Of course, sir." Her remarks were broken off, as far as we were concerned, by the entrance of the gentleman from the dining room. We tried to dodge and get away, but two of them caught us, and holding us by the ears asked our names, which question seems to be, with most people, a test of a child's intelligence. To answer it was a task I dreaded more than Hercules did the Augean stables. My name, short as it was, seemed to stretch to an equal length to the King of Siam's whenever I had to pronounce it, and I've often blessed the man who invented cards. There being no escape now, we drawled out respectively, John Smith and Luli Mayland, and were released, one of our captors remarking as we scampered off, "Smith, you and Mayland ought to raise them up for each other. They'll make a fine match one of these days." I fully forgave him for asking my name and earnestly wished he might be a prophet. Glad to get away, Luli and I ran out into the backyard and played till it was very dark, when one of the servants came to call us in. We found all the guests gone but Dr. and Mrs. Mayland, who were just entering their carriage. I bade Luli a hasty goodbye and turned back into the house, feeling a joyous flutter about the heart as if a hummingbird were enclosed in it and was struggling to escape. Mother met me in the hall and said, "John, it is so late you need not get your lesson tonight, but as you are perhaps sleepy you can go into the nursery, and I will come in and hear you say your prayers." Though I was a good stout boy, Mother could not get out of the old habit of seeing me to bed and hearing me repeat my prayers aloud. I entered the nursery, but instead of undressing, sat down by the fire and began, fancy unto fancy linking. And again I was on the desert island, but the boot track had disappeared, and our snug grotto received the addition of a grate, a rug, and a house model. The savages came and smacked their bloody lips through the bars of our cave and yelled with eager desire to reach us, but I cared not. I was happy as long as those curls were drooping over the blocks and I was stealing kisses from the rosy architect. Mother came in and broke my reverie. I got up, undressed, and kneeled down by her side. Laying my cheek on her knee, I commenced Our Father with my tongue, while my mind was still in the grotto with Luli. I had not repeated half when a ferocious savage tore loose a bar and was squeezing himself through the aperture, while I stood on the defensive with one of the Corinthian columns of our little house for a weapon, ready to strike down the invaders. So vivid was the picture that even my tongue forgot its office, and with the broken prayer upon my lips I lay gazing into the glowing coals. Mother's hands touched my head as she said gently, "My child, what are you thinking of? Remember you are praying to the great God who will not hear you unless you ask in earnest. So if you were asking your father for something you wished very much, would you not think of what you were saying? Yes, ma'am, I replied, meekly, at length recalled from my vision. And do you not want God to take care of father and mother and yourself tonight? Yes, ma'am. Then ask him as you ought. And with that soft hand upon my head, all earthly visions vanished, and I repeated the oft-said prayer with all the childhood's earnestness and its simple, trusting faith. I rose, got in the bed, received mother's goodnight kiss, and as I closed my eyes, Queen Mab's grey gnat coachman drove his atomic beam across my nose. And Luli, Models, Savages, Castle, Miss Gertrude, and crestfallen Frank Paining all danced before me and danced me to sleep. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to subscribe in whatever service that you use so that you get new episodes whenever they come out. A reminder that the music for the show is Un Désert by Kumiko. Check out more of their work on their website, which you'll find linked in the show notes. Good night, and sweet dreams.